right. Uh, Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Well, table two has it. So, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. I hope you have enjoyed the conference to date and had a nice time at the reception. I just have to say for myself, this has been such a wonderful couple of days. The sessions have been outstanding. The company has been great. The conversation between sessions has continued a lot of the issues and the ideas that have come up through the conversation and discussions, and has really got me to think about a lot of things moving forward. And I have a lot of takeaways, so I'm looking forward to this. I also wanted to extend my congratulations to Larry Wall. He has been an important person for us. This conference wouldn't be what it is without Larry, so thank you for all your hard work, your commitment to making this a great thing. I have the great privilege of being the moderator for a closing conversation with two people who I greatly admire and really enjoy being a colleague with. So the first is Loretta Mester, and Loretta has served as the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland since 2014. She began her Fed career as an economist at the Philly Fed in 1985, rose to be the research director there, one of the real leaders as a female economist in the Federal Reserve System before being appointed to head the Cleveland Fed. She earned her bachelor's in math and econ from Barnard College in Columbia, and her master's and PhD in economics from Princeton, where she was a National Science Foundation Fellow. Welcome, Loretta Mester.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by Susan Collins. And Susan has been president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston since July of 2022. She's an international economist with a lifelong interest in policy and its impact on living standards. And she's, like Ed Glazer last night, both of these ladies published 40 times more than I am. Like these are really just amazing scholars. Susan has been, she's basically held every leadership position you could possibly imagine. She's been provost, she's been dean, she's been professor, research scholar, board member at universities and at organizations including the University of Michigan, Brookings, Georgetown, and Harvard. She earned her PhD in econ at MIT and her undergraduate degree at Harvard. Please join me in welcoming Susan Collins.
Thank you.
Now, we have some questions we have to go through, but I like, when I moderate these sort of discussions or situations, there's a phrase we have that's called Atlanta style. Right, so we like to have our sessions go a particular way, and so we usually start our meetings with something called a check-in question. Today's check-in question is going to be, like, tell me an interesting fact about yourself, or share an interesting fact about yourself that you don't think people would otherwise know. And I'll give you some time to reflect on that. And I'll go first. So for me, in a previous life, I was a radio DJ. And I did R&B music, and I also was a sports reporter on the air for Harvard. So it was hard sports times most of the time. But it was fun to really do that. And if you ever get the chance, and you get to watch me watch a football game or a basketball game, you'll see what I did on the radio. So that'll be very good. Loretta, what do you got for us?
Right, that's too hard to top. An interesting fact about me is there is actually not one interesting fact about my life that people don't know. Ooh, I beg to differ.
Okay.
You gonna let me get away with that?
No, we're not going to let you get away with that. So we do this with. So Andre Anderson, our first vice president, and I, we meet every employee on their first day, and we ask them this question. And so we ask them, where'd you grow up, and what interesting fact, don't give us a bio, don't give us all that kind of stuff. And we have a bar a minimum bar that you have to exceed in order for the fact
I
to
knew
count.
you had a bar. It's right out there.
So here we go. Okay. All right. So
I love the opera, and I plan to travel and go to the opera in my time off.
do you have a favorite opera?
I do not have a favorite opera. I love all opera.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that. So, all right. So, Susan, what would you offer up for us?
Okay, but I have to start by saying you described this as a situation. I didn't realize what we were getting ourselves into here. But so, in case you maybe hadn't been able to tell just by listening to me, I actually started life with a Scottish accent because I was born in Edinburgh.
Can you slip into a Scottish brogue or something?
I don't do accents. I can't do either Jamaican or Scottish, unfortunately. And you can guess what kind of I don't know how to describe my current accent. It just is what it is. But it is a true fact. So.
Well, very good. I think we're checked in. That's very good. All right. So every interview I've ever done afterwards, the reporter says it would be journalistic malpractice if I didn't ask you about what you think is coming with the economy. Like, what's your viewpoint of the economy, no matter what the topic is? So I want to start with that conversation, and I'll offer up my view first. This economy has been incredibly resilient, stronger than I expected, and I've been really pleased by how fast inflation has come down in spite of that. I want to talk more about that, but I'd love to get your thoughts and additions and how you see things. And Loretta, you want to go first?
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, that's been the remarkable kind of journey we've been on here. I think in the first part of the year, the economy was more resilient than we thought. And remember, last year, my forecast was that we'd probably see growth this year below trend. Now I think it'll be above trend. The inflation data we got in the first quarter were disappointing. I never expected really inflation to be able to disinflate as quickly as we saw in the second half of this year, but I was disappointed that we didn't have progress in the first quarter. We did get a welcome CPI report, but I think it's a little too soon to determine where inflation necessarily is going. Base case, I do think we're going to have inflation come down, but I think it's going to take longer than I originally thought it would.
Yeah, I would actually agree with both of those comments. I think what I would add is just the elevated degree of uncertainty, which continues to be a real feature of the economy, both in terms of the monthly data, and so to Loretta's point, really not overreacting to any one set of readings is important, but also in terms of some of the behavioral relationships. So I continue to call myself a realistic optimist. That's been true for a while. Realistic, there are risks, there are those uncertainties, but I really am optimistic that, although I think it'll take longer, that we will bring inflation down with the labor market staying healthy.
I want to talk about the labor market in a second, but just given that outlook, like, what are you thinking about what an appropriate policy stance should look like? And Susan, we'll just start with you.
Yeah, sure. So to me, that actually links directly with, I think this is a moment when, or a period when patience really matters. I think the data have been very mixed, and so being quite patient, I think it's going to take longer than I had previously thought, and that seconds something that Loretta just said. But I think that it's important to look really holistically at the information and the data because they're quite mixed. And the uncertainty that I mentioned before, I think, is a key factor as well. I think we're well positioned, and I think policy is restrictive, and we're seeing moderately so perhaps, and we are seeing the economy coming into better balance. And I think that's both on the supply side and on the demand side, and I think that's what we need to see, but it's going to take longer for us to see the extent of progress that I think is going to be necessary to change our policy stance.
I mean, I agree with that. I think this is all about risk management, appropriate risk management now, and if you think about what's happened over the first part of this year, the risks that were too restrictive and that we're going to have something, go awry on the employment part of the mandate have gone down because we saw stronger data than we expected. And then the inflation, data said, okay, well, maybe inflation is going to hang up a little bit more. So that suggests that, okay, we're going to have to keep rates, restrictive, and I do think they are restrictive right now for longer than we thought. But because the real side of the economy has been as resilient as it has, we're not taking that big of a risk of keeping our interest rate where it is for longer until we gather that information about what is that path of inflation. I think it's too soon to determine that, oh no, it's all stalled out and we're not going to get disinflation. But I also think that we have an opportunity here, given the well-positioning of monetary policy, to actually gather that data and to get more confidence that inflation is on that sustainable time of path back to 2%. So I think we're well-positioned, and I think it's going to be risk management and making sure that we keep monetary policy well-positioned as we go forward through this until we get back to price stability.
So I basically agree with both of you. I wanted to sort of push on a little further about how we think about well-positioned as we move through the rest of this year. So, one of the things that we've heard when our team talks to business leaders is that there's a lot of capital on the sidelines. People are really sensitive about the possibility of being able to time their re-entry into the marketplace to try to take advantage of declining interest rates so that they can have a little cost benefit on this. Are you hearing the same things, and does that give you pause in terms of what a trajectory of policy should look like moving forward?
So I'm not hearing that. What I am hearing is that, going into the last FOMC meeting, a lot of the people we talked to, and we talked to a lot of people over the district, were like, wow, things are actually a little bit better than I thought they would be this year. But they're still sort of being a little cautious about, not overspending, not overhiring. It's gotten easier to hire now. So I think they're optimistic that things actually are turning out a bit stronger than they thought. But I haven't heard that they're all poised to jump in as soon as maybe we make an interest rate cut. I do think, though, if you think about, policy has to be forward-looking. We wouldn't want to keep interest rates where they are now until inflation gets down to 2%. So at some point, if inflation and inflation expectations continue to move down, you would want to bring your policy rate down to avoid an inadvertent tightening of policy, right? Because you think about the real rate. So that's going to happen at some point. But right now, we need to just be a little bit, as Susan said, patient on this and gather more data so there's more clarity around what that inflation path looks like. And frankly, we're not taking a big risk by doing that because so far the labor market remains very healthy. Now, I certainly think we have to balance the risk. We've got to be very attentive to what's happening on the real side of the economy in terms of growth and the labor market when we're doing this. But I think that's sort of the job going forward, is to do that evaluation and balance those risks.
Yeah. So I'm hearing cautious optimism as well. And again, there's some difference across sectors, and there's some unevenness. So I'm hearing that there are pretty widespread, it's easier to hire, that firms are not feeling like they need to raise wages at the same degree that they might have some time ago. That speaks to things coming into better balance and into, some adjustment that will reduce some of the pressures that I think we saw perhaps in the first half of the first quarter of this year. But again, I think it's quite mixed. I think different sectors are seeing different things, and I think that there's uncertainty in terms of what kind of pricing decisions might make sense going forward. So this is really a time to be patient, recognizing that we are well positioned, and I agree with Loretta from that standpoint as well.
So I'm going to want to ask a question about the labor markets in a second, but I did want to remind you, because I forgot to do this last time, if you have questions, use the app facility, and I'm getting them here on the iPad. We will definitely leave time for that as we move forward. I want to just talk briefly about the labor market. So, pandemic happens, we lose 22 million jobs. They come back much faster than anyone had expected. we start hearing about labor shortages. We get this imbalance in the supply side. Today, we see job growth is robust. Even with the last reading at 175,000, the average is far above population replacement. And wage growth is pretty strong, right? How do you think about this? And I didn't even mention immigration, which is an additional addition to this. Like, how do you think this jives with the notion that we're in a restrictive stance? Like, do you expect that labor markets are going to continue to be growing this briskly? Or do you think that there's a sort of an endpoint that's going to come in the next year or so?
So let me jump in on that one. I totally agree that the dynamics we've seen in labor markets are unusual, really interesting, and also have lots of dynamics to them. So I think the strength of what we've seen in labor markets has both factors that are on the supply side and also on the demand side. On the demand side, the real strength in household balance sheets has led to the strength in demand and consumption, and we've seen that, and that's helped to create demand across a pretty broad set of sectors for additional workers. And then on the supply side, it's not just the immigration that you mentioned, but it's also the increase in labor force participation. And one of the things I've been really struck by is the extent to which that has really been concentrated among women. Despite the fact that the dependent care challenges have still been, continue to be really challenging, and the extent of labor productivity increases, which we've seen, and of course time will tell the extent to which the increases we'll see will continue, how much of it's a level increase or not. But and how much of it is ongoing. But I do think that there's evidence of the restrictiveness of policy showing through in some of the indicators that I mentioned. It's getting easier to hire, turnover is way down, some of the wage growth has moderated. So I think the strength comes from multiple factors, and the rebalancing that we're seeing shows that there is some restriction in there. And so I think strength will continue, but perhaps not at the kind of payroll growth that we had seen, which I do think is likely to moderate, but again, over time.
I mean, I agree with that. And if you talk to the firms that we talk to, they do say, as Susan said, it's become easier to hire than it was a couple of years ago, and easier to retain workers than it was a couple of years ago. If you look at sort of job openings to unemployed, that's basically almost back down to where it was pre-pandemic. Job openings have come down, the rate of job openings have come down. Labor force participation, at least among, which prime age, which I hate that. I feel like I'm still in my prime and I'm not in that category,
yeah.
But anyway, prime age worker force participation has come back up. So there's a lot of evidence that it is moderating and getting into better balance, as Susan said. But I do think one of the surprises has been the resilience in those numbers, because I was expecting that we would have seen a bit slower job growth by now. So I think it underscores what Susan said, which there's things going on the supply side and the demand side, but we have to be attentive to that as we go forward. That's why I think it's going to be this balancing to make sure that we're taking into account what the risks are and keeping policy well positioned so that it can respond no matter how things play out.
So we had a session early in the conference on transmission of monetary policy. And there's been, basically for the most part of the better part of this year, a conversation about, does the Fed's policy have the same oomph or efficacy that it's always had, or has something fundamentally changed such that we might think that it's not as strong as it was, or maybe there isn't any efficacy at all. What's your take on that? Like, do you think that our policy still has strength? Are you feeling that it's being masked by things? Like, what's driving the dynamic that we've seen over the last, we've been at this level for quite some time now, the better part of a year, and yet there's still a lot of energy in the economy. What do you make of that? So
it seems to me that, so first of all, we can't fully parse out what some of the different dynamics are, but I'll tell you what my view would be given the data that we've seen so far, and that is that a number of special factors are really playing a very important role. So special factors such as the very strong household balance sheets that we went into this cycle having, which is unusual compared to other cycles. Strong firm balance sheets as well. I think those have been playing a significant role. You know, and it's also true if you go back and look at the, you know, those long and variable lags estimated on prior cycles, which, you know, they have a range of like 4 to 5 quarters after coming up to a peak rate for when the full effects of monetary policy would come through. We've been at the peak now, it's only 3 quarters. And so even from that standpoint, and those prior cycles with the lags were not estimated on from a period where there had been such a long prior time of low rates. And so I think there are a lot of reasons why special dimensions of this cycle could explain why we're moderately restrictive and we have perhaps still more in the pipeline, although it's possible that there have been some more fundamental changes. I just don't think that we can really tell yet. And my null hypothesis would be that the special factors are really playing a significant role.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at sort of what's happening in the economy, I think you can see that monetary policy has, you know, helped moderate demand. I mean, I think you talk to, you know, businesses, they're saying the same thing. It is harder to, you know, buy a house. I mean, there's definitely sectors where you can see the effects of monetary policy. Now, is it as restrictive as one might have thought, given the level of interest rates? I would say probably not going into this. As I said, I thought that we would have seen more slowdown on the real side than we have. But I also think that there's things happening on the supply side that also have affected things. And, you know, in the last summary of economic projections, we have to put in a, you know, what do you think the long run neutral rate is? I raised mine because I think given the estimates that I'm getting out of models on that and also what we've seen in the economy is it could very well be we're less restrictive than perhaps we would have been beforehand. And there are a number of dynamics that go into that R-star calculation. So again, you know, the earlier session today talked about the balance sheet as being one of those factors, perhaps. But I think, again, that's why I think it's really crucial that we stay well positioned and make sure that we're continuing to make progress on the price stability part of the mandate and trying to keep labor markets healthy. And if we can keep policy well positioned, I think we'll be able to achieve both parts of the mandate. And what the level of interest rates are that achieves that, that's going to be the work going forward to sort of evaluate that. When we started the tightening cycle, policy was not well positioned, right? Inflation had been going up for quite some time, and we were still at a zero, essentially zero interest rate. And then we had to move very quickly and pretty aggressively relative to history. So, you know, that was uncomfortable for some of the reasons we talked about today in terms of the banking system. You know, would they be able to handle that pace of increase? So that's, like, to me, a lesson here is that you don't want to get into that situation again. And that's why this really evaluating risk and making sure that policy is well positioned to handle the risk no matter which ones manifest themselves. As Susan said, there's a lot of risk out in the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty. You know, there could be risks that we're not even, you know, thinking about now. You've got to keep yourself well positioned so that you can move either way. And I think policy rates where they are allow us to do that.
Yeah, so when I get this question, I try to remind folks, in many regards, I think we're still in a pandemic economy. And all the supports that happened, the ability of families to still get income but not be able to spend, has put people in a much stronger position. I also think that the way that inflation spiked and the forward guidance we gave to say interest rates are not going to stay where they are caused a lot of households to refi and lock in their low rates, caused a lot of businesses to do the same. And so a lot of parties in the economy today are not as interest rate sensitive as they might otherwise be. We had a conversation with a business leader who said, look, my next investments today are software as a service. I'm not buying a machine or any of those sorts of things. And that is an expense. That's not credit, right? And so I'm not even interest rate sensitive on how I'm going to introduce technology into my business in the same way I was before. I think all of those things are suggestive that it's just going to take a longer time for folks to turn to interest rates as something that's going to drive their decisions in a material way. But they know that it's coming. Like, no one I've ever talked to says, well, I don't think about interest rates ever anymore, and then we don't have to worry about it. It's just that where they are today is not the first line of constraint, but it's going to get there. So for me, I really think about this is about efficacy, letting time pass, letting people work out of those situations and get back into another one.
I think it depends on where you are. I think certain sectors are quite interest rate sensitive at the moment.
For sure.
So I
for
think,
sure.
Yeah. I don't know whether I want to conclude that the world is totally different, the transmission mechanism is totally different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I think about our policy cascades through the economy, right? And it hits the most sensitive sectors first, and then it keeps flowing through. It's that flow through that's going to change. So, I'm sure both of you have had the same thing talking to mortgage divisions of banks. They say we've been in a recession for a year now, and so it really does have that sensitivity. I want to ask a different question about the pandemic, though. There was a lot that happened in the pandemic. What do you think is going to be some of the big, important, lasting shifts that sustain coming out of the pandemic?
So I would point to a couple of things that I think are going to be lasting. One of them has to do with the way we use technology in work. And there are a lot of dimensions to that. But, if you think about it, we had the technology to do a lot of those remote meetings well before the pandemic. But it's hard to imagine something else that would have happened that would have caused this synchronized learning and experimentation across sectors, across geographies, across firms, for figuring out how to actually do this. And I think that has changed the trajectory of the way certain kinds of technology are used in work, and I think that's lasting, and I think it's still playing out in terms of what the implications of that are. So again, we had the technology, but I think the pandemic really changed collectively the way we use it. And the other thing I think is how we think about supply chain. We had a conversation yesterday also about the implications of supply chain. Many of the changes predated the pandemic, but I think we're often crystallized there. Everything from the fact that it's now a regular conversation at the FOMC tables to look at information about supply constraints. I think a different understanding of how persistent they can be, but also the interactions with demand shocks, shifts in consumption behavior, and supply chain challenges at the same time. That interaction, I think, has changed both how we think about things as policymakers, how businesses think about things, and I think there's some lasting effects there as well. So there are others, but those are two that I would highlight.
I mean, those are big ones, and I agree with those, definitely. I think there's also sort of a changing, maybe it's a preference shock, how people think about work and their attachment to the workforce, and maybe there's, balance that came to play and people thinking about it differently, and that affects the labor market and how you think about the labor market if you're an employer. And I don't know how that's going to play out, frankly. I think that's sort of something that also is sort of, we have to think about that harder than before in terms of, how much people want to balance work and life. And that feeds into sort of this work from home, which is part of this. The other thing I would say is that I think technological change, I think people saw the benefits of moving faster and being prepared for things that you're not anticipating. So more resiliency, being, faster innovation, I think could come out of this as well. So there's some positives here too.
And I'll just say on this, I try to remind people we're employers too. Right, so we are in the mix trying to figure out the answers to these things, and it's complicated. And there are lots of different preferences that are shifting that makes it actually quite a challenge, but it keeps our days lively for sure. So I'm going to go to questions now. We have about 15 minutes left. Now, the first question, are we learning that lags in monetary policy are longer, or that the neutral rate is higher, or both? And the ancillary, the add-on is, what factors would lead to a higher equilibrium rate?
So why don't I jump in on that one? And I think that it's very hard in real time to parse out the different possible explanations or combination of explanations of what we're seeing. So as I said before, and Raphael, you actually kind of elaborated on the special factors that characterize this cycle. Really, I think, do explain some reduced interest sensitivity. I actually think that that's starting to dissipate, but kind of early days. And that could look like longer lags, but I see that as special factors. I also think that there could be reasons why the underlying neutral rate might be higher, perhaps in the medium run. There are a variety of different factors that would lead to, the higher productivity that I mentioned would lead to non-inflationary higher growth, and that would be associated with a higher neutral rate, at least in the medium term. Higher investment, whether it's for greening our economy, there's a variety of different things. The kind of reshoring we talked about a bit last time could lead to that too. But then those longer term demographic factors are still there, and how those are going to offset or not one another, I think it's just really hard to tell. And that's slow moving. So I think that it's too early to really parse those things out, but it's something that we need to keep paying really close attention to.
I agree with that. I think, there are reasons, factors you can point to. This balance between savings and investment is a driver of what the neutral rate will be in the future. The demographics actually work in two ways. The aging of the population, right? We think savings, people start spending down, but then also you're living longer. And so that means that you may have to work, so it's very complicated, as you say, to actually come to it. But there are factors you can point to that would suggest the neutral rate may be higher now than it was in the recent past. And I think that's something to keep in mind, added to the underlying structural changes that are uncertain at this point that make it a challenge to sort of understand. But remember, the phrase is long and variable lags. So I don't think this is that unusual that, there isn't one lag that we know that's the time frame.
All right, so we're going to now go into a modified lightning round. So,
Polite, he's telling us to shut up. That's okay.
We're too long-winded.
we are doing a modified lightning round. I'm just going to double down on that. And so for each question, just one of you is going to respond. We actually have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get through as many as possible.
And this lightning round, what do we get? 1 word, 2 word, 3 words? What do we get?
We don't want to let him constrain us too much, Loretta.
So I knew this was going to be a hard panel to moderate. Right, this is what comes with familiarity, and they give as good as they get. So I'll leave you to judge what the appropriate response is. All right, so next question is, we've heard papers on reshuffled supply chains, on constraints on monetary transmission, calls for more attention to financial stability and the spillover effects of some of these things. There's a lot of, Susan, you mentioned both of you mentioned there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Where does this leave monetary policy? Are we in an era where it's more likely that there are going to be mistakes, or that there's going to be this continual scramble to try to stay on top of things? Like, how do you think about it?
Go ahead. So, I think uncertainty is not new. I do think we are in a period of elevated uncertainty. And, to me, what that says is that we need to look more broadly at the kind of information that we use, the quantitative as well as qualitative. And while we are doing the underlying analyses, trying to potentially model out our star and look at a variety of other factors, that's not really what's determining monetary policy decisions meeting to meeting in real time. It's about the risk management and balance. It's about what we're seeing in the inflation data, what we're seeing in labor market data, what we're seeing more broadly. I mean, I think of there being a constellation of information, and we're trying to get that picture meeting by meeting to see what makes sense. And at the moment, I fully agree, being patient is exactly the right policy, because I think that we are in a place where we're well balanced. So that wasn't a lightning response, but you didn't interrupt, so I take it that that was all good.
Oh, no.
All right, scenarios. My one word, scenario. I like scenarios, scenario planning. Look at different scenarios.
There you have it. I would say, Susan, your answer here was, I almost felt like you were clairvoyant, because the very next question on my list says, what's the constellation of data that you would need to see to make you confident it is appropriate to cut rates? But since you started it, we'll give this to Loretta.
Well, I need to see a few more months of inflation data that it looks like it's coming down, but I also am very attentive to what's going on with inflation expectations. I really believe that we were able to get the disinflation we have gotten because we did not allow long-term inflation expectations to move up. And I think that was a crucially important component of the disinflation we got. I think last year we got a lot of help on the supply side. And one of the reasons I didn't expect that we'd see as much progress this year is because I don't think we're going to get as much help on the supply side, because as things normalize and things come into better balance in the labor market, we can't really expect that. But I do think that's going to be key for my view of where policies should go.
All right, thank you. Next question. There's been a lot of talk about degrading quality of data, especially in terms of some of the surveys that are done by the federal government. How do you take that on board? How does that impact your thinking about having a data-dependent approach to deciding monetary policy?
So I actually do think that paying careful attention to the data, how it's collected, what happens there is important, and there may be things we can do to improve it. I've long believed, and well before coming into this position, that when you see something similar, when you look at something in a variety of different ways and it's pointing in the same direction, that's more compelling. And so to me, that really causes me to look more holistically at the range of information, both quantitative, model-based analysis and qualitative, and to take the time, which I think we're well positioned to do, to gather more information before making decisions. So that's where it leads me. That's the methodical, patient, holistic.
I mean, the other thing is that we've seen a kind of explosion of new surveys and throughout the Federal Reserve banks, right? So we're collecting a lot of data. The Cleveland Fed collects a lot of data on inflation expectations. Atlanta, you're very well known for the data that you collect and the surveys you do. So there is a richer data source as well that can point you in the directions, even as sample sizes for some of the official government statistics go down. So I think we have a lot of data that we look at all the time, and that the consistency of looking at the same data, you get a sense of where the economy is going.
And I would just say on this, both of your answers I totally agree with. We all have realized that just relying on the set sources of data that we had from the federal government was not giving us a complete real-time picture of where the economy is. And we've all needed to supplement. So our bank, we have a survey center. We run a bunch of surveys. We have staff that go out and just talk to people. And we try to talk to anywhere from 60 to 100 business leaders in the FOMC cycle to make sure that we're getting on-the-ground intelligence in real time on this. And it's been super helpful, I have to say. For me, it comes in and it winds up being new information that gives a richer perspective on where the economy is.
And a lot of that data that you're getting when you go, we have I think 8 advisory councils that are across the district, and then a couple other advisory councils that we have on the energy sector. What you get is more forward-looking information than some of the statistics. So the statistics are very good about telling you kind of where you are, where you've been, where you are, maybe. But what you get when you actually do this sort of gathering across a reconnaissance across the district is that you really get information on things that you need to keep an eye on because of where things are going. And I think that's been very helpful. You do have to read through because it's anecdotal, so it's a little bit different than what you can do with, the hard statistical data. But it does give you a rich sense of kind of maybe where things are headed and where the risks are going forward. And that's what I think's been very helpful in this kind of uncertain environment of a pandemic where, when I think people forget at the start of the pandemic how really, really uncertain things were and some of the dire,
Yes.
scenarios that could have occurred. And it's good to think back to that time when things were really, really, when we were washing our mail. I mean,
I'm glad we're not in that time
glad we're
today.
not there.
Yeah.
glad we're not there.
But just really wanted to second the importance of some of that qualitative and often forward-looking information. I totally agree with that.
All right, so before I wrap up, I want to do one last question for both of you. It really is sort of a step back about sort of where you are today. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to reflect on what your Fed experience has been and how you've experienced it. So Susan, you've been here, you're a relative newbie, and you've been here about 2 years, and I'm 7, going on 7, and I feel like a newbie. So there's that. Can you talk a little bit about what surprised you about heading a reserve bank and serving on the FOMC? How's it been?
Yeah, so I have to say, you learn a ton every day, work with really committed, really experts in a range of different fields. And so, I walk in every day knowing I'm going to learn a lot, and that's pretty wonderful. Some of the surprises we've been talking about, this has been a really unusual time for the economy, and trying to understand what data to look at, what to pull together, how to understand. I mean, there have been certainly surprises along the way, and I expect that those will continue. I do have to say, I thought a lot about monetary policy before actually taking this role. It's not the same as actually being in the seat and thinking through how are you going to make this decision.
Yeah, that's
and
for sure.
Yeah, so if you would, and that's still true, right? The importance of the work that we do and the commitment, and you can feel that around the FOMC table. That's not really a surprise, but it is something that I take really seriously. And just the one other thing I would say, because I knew quite a bit about the Federal Reserve, but I didn't really understand the breadth of the portfolio of work that the Federal Reserve does to really support a vibrant economy. And I like to say that for the Boston Fed, our overarching mission is a vibrant economy that works for everyone, not just for some people. And the range of ways that we, through our research, through our community and economic development, through our engagement across the First District, the range of ways that we really are committed to doing that, often in collaboration, I think is not well known, and was also a surprise to me, even though I had known quite a bit when I came in, and I think it really matters.
Well, I totally agree with that. Our tagline is an economy that works for everyone. So we're kindred spirits on that journey, and it's really always an inspiration to see the ways that we can make a difference. So Loretta, for you, now you've been in the Fed system for nearly 40 years. Like no one's gonna call that a newbie. I think at our bank though, you would rank maybe 30 or 40 in terms of like tenure. We have lots of long tenured people. So can you talk about, first, are you still learning day to day? And then second, how would you describe the evolution of the Federal Reserve and how it's changed over your career? And what things stand out to you about sort of where we are today as opposed to where we are when you started?
I mean, I learn every day. I hope I learn every day. Gosh, it'd be kind of bad if I weren't. There's a lot to learn. And I just want to I feel like I've been privileged to have my career in the Fed. Like, it's not something I necessarily planned, and I didn't expect to stay as long as I did. But, you come in and you're an economist and you're doing research and it's exciting and you get to learn from a lot of really smart people, which I think is great, and then you take on more responsibility. I think the thing instead of saying what's changed, I'd like to focus on what's the same. the importance of the work of the Fed and the mission-driven people that are in the Fed and the importance of the institution. So, in my bank, I always say it's the people make up the institution, but the institution itself is important, and doing all we can to make sure that it stays a really healthy, vibrant institution, because the mission is so important. And in my years there, and it's been a long time, and I've been in 2 reserve banks, and I visited the Board of Governors, 201, everyone is really focused on the mission of the Fed and making sure that they're doing the best work they can, because they feel the mission is very important, whether it's monetary policy or the other things that we do as Federal Reserve banks, whether it's the payments, work that we do, whether it's the Treasury work, right, that Kathy helps the system do. There's a lot of work that goes on in the Fed, but everybody that I've ever run into is really focused on trying to do the best work they can. And I don't know whether there are that many institutions that could say that, but I've seen it firsthand. And you go to the FOMC meetings, and I started going when we had Alan Greenspan was chair, then Ben and Janet and Jay Powell, and 201. They all have very different styles, and that's a good dinner conversation to sort of talk about styles. But everyone was really focused on setting monetary policy to really, really, really achieve a healthy economy, price stability, maintain price stability. And so I think that's something that I take away from the Fed.
Well, I will echo that 100%. I tell people all the time it's the best job I've ever had. And it's because of what you were just talking about. The collection of people that work on this are just incredible. And I would count both of you among them. Like, you have helped make my experience tremendously rich. You've helped our institution be a great one. And I just want to thank you for all your contributions that you've made and all that you will continue to make moving forward. It's been such a privilege for me to share a stage with Loretta and Susan. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and please thank them for All right, I think we're done. So please enjoy your dinner and enjoy each other's company. It's been great to have you all. Thank you.